Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-Ali al-Azim. Tawakkaltu ala Allah. Can everyone hear me okay? Apologize today for starting a little bit later than 4 o'clock. Inshallah, this hopefully is not very inconvenient for everyone. I also apologize for I'm dealing with a little bit of coughing, a little bit of sickness. So if my voice is a little bit rough today, I apologize. We've lived last time. First we say Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. We lived last time where we said that we started talking about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we've said that the first sifa or attribute of God that we will look at today is called sifa nafsiyya, or kind of an attribute of God that has to do with God's own essence, with the essence of God, not something that God does or something that we perceive of God, like we say God is merciful or God is forgiving. No, this is an attribute that has to do with the very being of God. And that we said that existence or wujud, the existence of God himself, is necessary for him. We say wajibul wujud, God is necessary existent. And the proof for that is the existence of creation. And the opposite of that existence is non-existence, which is adam, which is impossible for God to be non-existent. And I realized that there's a lot in this statement to unpack, and we'll take our time and we will not rush into anything, so that we inshallah reach a full knowledge and are able to realize and understand, because the point is not really to give you so much information and pack your brain with information. I know all of you are smart, but the point is to actually give you an understanding of your faith, a knowledge of your faith, so your faith is knowledge-based and understanding-based, and not just based on information and memorization. So when we talk about this attribute, which is existence for God, we kind of classify it or give it categorize it as a sifa nafsiyya, referring to the attribute of the essence of Allah himself, the essence itself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or that. Let me maybe give you a little bit of an example. Maybe you will bring this closer to you. So when I talk about you, when I talk about me, when I talk about any human being, there are things about us that has to do with our very own essence, with our very own being, that we cannot separate from who we are. For example, our humanity. When we say I am a human, when I say you are a human, being a human is something that has to do with your very essence. Okay? We cannot change that. We cannot separate that from who you are, and from our very own being. I might have like a red hair, or I might have a blue hair, or might have yellow hair, whatever. We can change that without really having it impacting our very essence and who we are. But we cannot change our humanity. We cannot change the fact that we are humans. We can also say, that I'm loud. when I speak. Imam Hassan, when you're describing me, when you're giving my attributes to someone, and someone is asking you and saying, "Hey, can you describe Imam Hassan to me?" You say, "Imam Hassan is this and this and this and that." There are things that maybe aren't really essential to my being and my essence and my that, and there are things that are. So the things that are essential to me is that I'm a human. That's something that you have to describe me with. Otherwise, you are not describing Imam Hassan, you're describing something else or someone else, or probably something else, because if Imam Hassan is not a human, then Imam Hassan is Android or something, or, or I don't know, just paper figure, whatever. So the point is, my humanity is part of my essence as a person. But my hair, maybe my voice, maybe the language I speak, all of that isn't really part of my essence, and we can. It doesn't really harm if we change that a little bit. So when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we say that this attribute has to do with the very essence of God, that is existence. So we cannot really separate the existence of God without any understanding of what and who God is. And another point we said is that God, related to this attribute of existence, God is wajib al-wujud, or the only necessary existence, whereas everyone and everything else is kind of dependent and contingent on that existence of God. In other words, what we're saying is that everything and everyone depends on God to exist, but God does not depend on anyone. And we find that in the Quran, in the surah that you guys memorize, all of you, inshallah, Surah Al-Ikhlas, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدْ. The Quran declares that, say, O Muhammad, say everyone, you should say and believe in that. God is Allah. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ. Say He is Allah. Ahad meaning unique, Allah the independent. Samad meaning does not rely or depend on anything else to exist. That's what it means to be wajib al-wujud. Excuse me. And scholars of the Quran and the Arabic language say that Samad here, Allahu as-Samad, refers to the being who needs none, but all are in need of God. Now, when we say that the proof for this existence of God is creation, that's logically, because creation logically requires some creator to create that and to bring us to existence. And some people have this rational proof, which I'm going to go into it a little bit with details, and actually we're going to see how even non-Muslims, we can benefit from them for some of their logical proofs for the existence of God. But the logical proof goes, or the rational proof goes as follows. The world and everything in it is constantly undergoing countless forms of change. Change here is very important. The change in the world around us. That's why when you read the Quran, you find Allah always giving you examples of change. Day and night. Life and death. The earth is dead and the water comes down, bring back life. All of that, what do we call that? We call that actually change. And every change of state necessarily implies the origination and the creation of a new state. So first the earth is dead. Once the water comes down, you find it green and lush. First, then it's night, but then once the sun comes up, or rather the earth goes around, then the sun is clear and light comes. So that's all change, and that needs someone to make and create that change in the world around us. So the only constant in this life is change. The only constant in this life is change. Look at yourself. You are born, you're first in your mother's womb, and then you are born a little baby, kind of helpless and need help, and then you grow up a little bit, you start walking, and then you grow up a little bit, you start becoming your own person and becoming independent, and then you become a man or a woman, you get married yourself, and you grow up old and you die. So see, all of this is change, and we are as people are nothing but reflection of all of that change that happened around us in the world. Therefore, the conclusion here is that the world and all that is in it is originated and has to have an originator and has to have a changer. And that's why God is called in some, in some sciences or some discussions, the first mover. God is the first mover, meaning that God is the one who moves this world and creates that change in the world around us. Otherwise, this mover and this originator and this creator, we call that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anyone, by the way, who denies that or not able to see that, we actually feel like they have to bring the proof for denying that fact. Because what they are doing is, think about yourself. You wake up in the morning, you go to the kitchen, and you find that delicious food on the kitchen table, eggs, bread, tea, cheese, this and that, cereal, whatever your mom makes for breakfast. If your mom makes cereal for breakfast, you need to have a protest at home. Anyway, just say. I'm not trying to put mothers in trouble here, but Anyway, moms work very hard, but come on, not cereal. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked here. The point is, when you wake up in the morning, you go to the kitchen and you see that table spread filled with beautiful and delicious and good smelling food. What do you think? Of course, you don't say, this food came from nowhere, and there is absolutely no one in this household that woke up early in the morning to create that delicious food, and thank you to them, I owe them. You don't say that. You say, my mom is an awesome person. She made that breakfast. She woke up early and she prepared an amazing breakfast for us. Thank you, Mom. That's exactly what we say in the world. That's why moms are very important, because they are a proof of the existence of God. Because you look at the world and you say, look at the trees, look at the birds, look at me as a human being, look at this universe working in harmony in an amazing way. There must have been someone who created that. And that someone we call God. So when someone comes and says, no, there is no creator, they are just as fool as someone who wakes up in the morning, sees this amazing table of breakfast and say, no one made that breakfast. How selfish is that? How disrespectful is that? But that's on them. They need to be the one who actually bring the proof, because the only obvious answer for the breakfast is that there is a chef. There is someone who cooked that breakfast. So when someone says that there is no God, they are the ones who actually have to make and come up with a proof that that proves their point, that there is no God. Again, we say that it's foolish to say that, because again, it's very obvious that there is actually a God. I hope that makes sense. And honestly, to be honest with you, if we say nothing else about the existence of God, that would have been enough. But we have to dig deeper, and we have to look at other proofs, and we have to look at what others say, so that we are equipped to answer any questions that people have. We are equipped to answer any doubts that come to our minds, and we are protected from any any discussions or silly arguments that people make and say, how does God exist and there is no God and things like that. So we have to actually learn a little bit more. And today I want to share with you something. We've learned a little bit about the scholar that put together that work we are studying together, Imam al-Bajuri. We've said that he was the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar. Today I want to take you a little bit on a side kind of journey, going to the Christian tradition. I've studied personally that scholar. His name is Thomas Aquinas, and he's actually very, very famous, and he was born around 1225, the year 1225, and died around the year 1274. He was an Italian, and he was a philosopher. He was also a Catholic priest. In fact, he was known as the doctor of the church. Doctor, not like an actual doctor that will perform surgeries and things like that, but meant that they called him the doctor because he was able to cure many of the religious and spiritual and theological problems that they had, and answer many of the questions and doubts that people had about God, and that's why they called him the doctor. So it's kind of an honorary and metaphoric um, uh, title. So to call him the doctor, also, because of his knowledge and his wealth and depth of knowledge, he was called the doctor of the church. And by the way, the Prophet ﷺ said, just in case if you're asking, why are you telling us about a proof about the existence of God from a Christian person, the Prophet ﷺ said that al-hikmah dallat al-mu'min ayyama wajadaha akhadaha, meaning or أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, meaning that wisdom is a lost property of the Muslim. Wherever they find it, they take it. So whether the wisdom is found with the Christian, with the Jews, with Buddhist, this or that, doesn't matter. You take it. And we become mature people who look at what benefits us, what's good for us, and we find it, and what's not, and what is contradictory to our faith and our tradition, we leave it, and we just we don't take it. So there's no harm in doing so. Anyway, he was, as I said, philosopher, theologian. He was a jurist, meaning he understood the law of the Christian tradition, and he was he was very famous for a lot of ideas that he put forth to defend the faith in and belief in God. So kind of, basically he has a very famous work. The most famous work actually he wrote is called the Summa Theologica, or the Summa Theologia. You can call it whatever. And that means like the summation of theology, the summation of Aqidah. And we've talked about what theology is and what Aqidah is last time. If you don't remember that, please take some notes from last time and rewatch that video. So he put together a work that has all the theology, all the Aqidah, all the principal beliefs in the Christian tradition. And I'm interested specifically in one part in that book. And that's how he kind of organized it. He will say question number 1, question number 2, question number 3, and then he will have certain articles, and then he will have objections. I'm not trying to get you into like something bigger than what you can chew on here, or something bigger than what you can digest, but at the same time I'm trying to open up your mind. And however young you are listening to me, you guys, you read stuff and you get into stuff at school and arguments and that are much bigger than that. So I don't want anyone to give me the excuse and say, hey, I'm too young, why are you teaching me these things? You guys are your world is much bigger than our world and the world of your parents and grandparents. Your world is much bigger, and you got to be equipped and you got to be ready. It's like, our world was like a small baby swimming pool that's like inflatable, you put in the backyard and you just jump in it. And then there came another time where it was like, a good size swimming pool, and then there's a deeper swimming pool, and now you guys, your time is like an ocean that's raging with big waves, and you gotta be ready. We cannot just like say, hey, dip your feet in the water. No, you gotta be ready to jump head first and dive into that sea. Anyway, so this is how he organized his book, this Summa Theologia. First, he says, question number 2, the existence of God. So that's what the question number 2, or the topic he's going to be discussing, has to do with the existence of God. Does God exist? So then the question here, or the sub question he's going to answer, is whether God exists. So that's a debate that people will have. You'll have people saying, does God exist? That God does not exist? He will address this question in details. And then he says objection number 1, which means there are people who may object and say, no, God does not exist. So he's saying, okay, tell me, you're saying that God doesn't exist? Can you tell me what your objection is? And I'm going to answer that. And that's why I love his work. I studied his book, almost like a big chunk of his book here in college, and I found it to be fascinating. The way he kind of have these discussions are very open, very logical, and is like finding these questions that people have and objections that people have and trying to answer them in a way that's very accessible for people. So he says, okay, tell me what your objection. You think God doesn't exist? Tell me, and I will try to answer that. So the objection says, it seems that God does not exist because if one of two contraries be infinite, the other would be altogether destroyed. But the word God means that he is infinite goodness. When we say God, that means God is infinitely good. God, like we say in Islam, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Ra'uf, all of these things are infinitely goodness that come from God. If therefore God existed, there would be no evil discoverable. But there is evil in the world, therefore God does not exist. I hope you followed with this. So the person who is objecting to the existence of God, saying God is infinitely good, which means there should not be evil in the world. But we look around us and we find that there is evil in the world. And now these people reach the conclusion that God does not exist. And by the way, take a note of this, you guys. Anyone who's listening, young or old, this question of evil, believe it or not, is the biggest question and source of doubt that lead a lot of people away from faith and lead a lot of people to abandon their faith, whether they are Muslims, Christians, Jews, or whatever. And especially nowadays, they look around the world and they say there's war and conflicts and disease and this and that and crises. Then there is evil in the world. If God is infinitely good, there should not be evil in the world, but since there is evil in the world, therefore God does not exist. That's their kind of argument. So what he does, Thomas Aquinas, or Saint Thomas Aquinas, he goes through this objection and tries to answer it, and he actually gives 5 ways to prove that God exists. So that's why his answer is called the 5 ways. And he's going to go in details why God exists. Now, I'm going to warn you before we start, there might be some really, there might be some really tough language here that needs a little bit of digestion, but stay with me. We're going to go through each way, and hopefully we are going to realize that this objection that says that God does not exist does not withhold and does not stand and is very weak. So he says, I answer that objection that God doesn't exist with the following. The existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. So we say to him, Saint Thomas, what are these 5 ways? Please enlighten us. He says, the first and more manifest way, so the most clear way, which means does not really need a little brain. You don't need to have PhD or understand rocket science to be able to figure that one out. But he says the first and most manifest way is the argument from motion. Motion, which is movement. The fact that things move. He says it's certain and evident to our senses. So here he's saying we're going to use our senses to be able to conclude that God exists. Which means if you can see and hear and feel and touch and all of that and smell, your senses lead you to the very conclusion that God exists. Which means he's saying, if you can sense, if you are even an animal, not even a human being, you can reach to the conclusion that God exists. So he says, it's certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Remember I spoke about the change? The things change, there's motion. Motion is change. When you grow up, that's motion. When your hair grow back, after you cut it, that's motion. The trees, when they grow from a seed, that's nothing but motion. Day and night, that's nothing but motion. So there is motion in the world. There's movement in the world. There is change in the world. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. Things don't just move on their own. They are put in motion. Something moves them. Like your car. You get into the car is moving. Who is moving that car? Unless you have a Tesla, which good for you. I commend you for being environmentally friendly. I mean, your car doesn't self-drive itself. You gotta put fuel. Even with Tesla, you have to put, you have to charge it, and you have to put the mechanism and the technology that allows it to move. So motion does not happen by itself. Change doesn't happen by itself. There must be another force that made that motion happen. For he says, for nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion. So in other words, to kind of break that apart, he's saying nothing moves by itself unless it's like it's potentially in motion by itself, but you still need someone or something or some force to allow it to move, to change, to grow, to go from point A to point B. People who like math and people who like physics and stuff will like that argument very much, because he's talking here about basically physics. He's saying things move from point A to point B, and they need some mover, they need some force to move something, to move it from point A to point B. Whereas a thing moves in as much as it is in act. He says, for motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. Moving something from, he's kind of going into a little bit of more details of what motion is or what change is. He says that something goes from potentiality to actuality. Your car has the potentiality of moving, has the capacity to move. I as a human being have the potentiality and the capacity to grow, to learn, to change. Same thing with the seed. A seed has the potentiality to grow, but it will never grow on its own. If you put a seed like that and you keep looking at it for days at a time, it will not grow. It only has the potentiality of growing. You gotta put it underground, you gotta cover it with soil, you gotta water it and take care of it, and then it grow, and then you weed, and then you take care of it. That's a seed going from being potentially growing to being actually grown tree. Are you guys following, or are you falling asleep? I hope you are not falling asleep, and I hope you are pulling through this and you are really trying your very best with me, because I promise you, once you realize what I'm talking about, once you just get a little bit of a taste of what I'm talking about, you will be amazed of how our faith and how the fact that God exists is something that we can actually argue for and understand rationally and understand with our reasons. And it's not just because your mama or baba or dad or mom or father or mother told you gotta believe, then you believe. No, it's something that you can actually realize and understand. And once you reach this point, nothing, I'm telling you, nothing will shake your faith. Insha'Allah. But he says, but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. So he's saying something that has the capacity to move something else, and has as almost like saying something smarter, or something that has reached the state of actuality itself, can move something else from potentially to actually existing, from or moving or being in a state of motion. So almost what he's saying here, I guess, like you gotta have a hierarchy. The seed needs a farmer. There's like a little riddle in Egypt, I think, that says something about how, like for you, like a little kid wants to buy something, and in order for them to buy it, they need money, and in order for them to give the money, they have to sell something, and in order for them to sell it, they have to have it first, and then they kind of go through like a little bit of a chain of motion. Then somehow a chicken gets involved in that riddle, and then the riddle says the chicken needs a seed, and the seed needs to come from a plant, and the plant needs to have a farmer, and the farmer needs to have blah. It kind of goes into this chain of motion. So that's what the St. Thomas Aquinas is saying here. You need that chain of motion. You need things to move things, to move things, to move things. But each one in that chain has to be a little bit in a place that is higher than the one before it, or the one after it. Thus, he says, that which is which is actuality hot as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actuality hot, and thereby moves and changes it. So he's giving us an example: fire and wood. Wood has the potential, state of being hot, of burning, but it can't do that on its own. Again, if you I wish that worked like cartoon movies, where you just have some sort of amazing superpower. You look at something and you set it on fire. It doesn't work like that, and that's why, by the way, just a side note, movies are fun, and especially a lot of movies for kids are fun, but you gotta be careful, because they can promote certain ideas that, if you're not sure, it becomes like putting poison in medicine. And if there are any parents listening, if your kids are watching movies, I'm all for that, but you gotta sit down with them, and don't interrupt the movie and be like super annoying, because they will never like to watch movies with you. But at least take note of certain things that are put out there, and maybe later have a conversation with them where you actually empower them to have a fun conversation. Don't be like holding the remote control in your hands and pausing every certain 3 seconds and be like, okay, let's have a conversation about what just was said or done. Don't do that. No one likes it. Okay, going back to what we were talking about. So he's saying that wood, you can't just stare at wood and make it hot or burn. You gotta have something that will make it burn. What is that thing? It's gonna be fire. Fire is actually hot, and it's gonna move the wood from being in a state of potentially becoming hot to actually being hot. So he's showing us that chain of reaction and motion. Okay? And thereby moves and changes it. Now, it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. So what he's saying here, that things cannot move them own selves and go from potentiality to actuality. All right, and grow the seed doesn't just grow itself. The fire does not burn itself. We don't just grow by our own and exist by our own commands. The car doesn't drive itself, again, unless you're driving some sort of like a supercar. Even with these cars, by the way, you still need to program it, and you need to have an app and program where it goes and how it moves and things like that. But anyway, so he's saying things cannot just bring themselves from potentiality to actuality. For what is actually hot cannot simultaneously be potentially hot, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. So he's saying one thing cannot be both at the same time, which is like a contradictory. Like a rational or reason they call it rational contradictory. Like something cannot be both hot and cold at the same time, or tall and short at the same time, or fat and thin at the same time. Like it just doesn't work. What he's trying to get at here is that everything is in need of something else to move it, to put it in motion, to go from one state to another, from being potentially this to being actually this or that. It's therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way a thing should be both mover and moved, i.e. that it should move itself. See, that's where he's getting at. So he's saying one thing cannot exist and not exist. One thing cannot move and not move. One thing cannot move its own self. It's always going to be either a mover or a moved, but can't be both at the same time. Cannot be both at the same time. That I might give you a little bit of an example, and I don't know if it will help bring that to your attention. Like a little seed, it has the potentiality of becoming a tree. Okay, but when it's still a seed, it is a seed. It's not a tree. Once it has grown and become a tree, now we can say it has the potential of becoming a seed, because it can create and generate a seed, and then you take the seed and plant it, and so on and so forth, and you go into that that chain of creation and that chain of moving and being moved. So the point, I don't want to make things more difficult and complicated, but what he's saying is that something cannot be moved and mover at the same time, cannot be creating and created at the same time, cannot be in motion and still at the same time. And therefore he says whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs to be put in motion by another. So here we go. The chain continues. Everything needs another thing, and another thing, and that by another again. But this cannot go on to infinity. Right? That makes sense. Like we cannot just keep going in infinity and say the seed was put on the ground by a farmer, the farmer was created by this, and then that this was created by another that, and we keep going on for infinity, because then there would be no first mover and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers move only in as much as they are put in motion by the first mover. So the point is, he's saying we cannot just go infinitely and say there was something that moved something that was moved by something, and we cannot just keep going infinitely, because just logically and reasonably does not make any sense. He says, as the staff moves only because it is put in motion by the hand. You know, I have a staff, I am walking, I am moving it with my hand. So there is a first, and then I was moved by another force, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. That's his conclusion. He says, therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. So, guys, you have just survived the first way or the first proof of the existence of God by one of the most well-known theologians and scholars, in fact, in the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. And again, his argument for the existence of God here, as you can see, is not based on the Quran, is not based on the Bible, is not based on revelation. It's based on observation. As you can see, the very first thing he said, we observe with our senses, which means anyone that has functioning senses and functioning reason can easily arrive at the conclusion that God exists, which, by the way, takes us to another big conversation that I don't think we are ready for yet, and we will have it later, which is about, what happens to people who lived in a place or lived in a time or lived in a circumstance where they did not actually have a chance to read or receive or even understand a revelation from God, whether it be the Quran, be it the Bible, the Torah, or any other revelation. What happens to these people? Are they going to be on the day of judgment accountable for not believing in God? Some people say yes, because if you have senses that are working, and if you have reason that is working, then you could easily, like we have seen, with a little bit of mental work and mental gymnastics, and trying to tie things and phenomena to each others, and look and observe how the world works, you can easily reach at the conclusion that there is a first mover, and that mover we all understand to be God. And I can argue even farther that not only that, but you can also reasonably reach to the conclusion that God, that first mover, that creator, is worthy of worship and praise and love and all the things that religion teaches us. In addition to that, another thing we learn from that argument, that it's very important to take care of our senses and take care of our minds, because they are very important. They help us realize and reach the conclusion that God exists. That's why in Islam, alcohol is forbidden, and drugs are forbidden, and intoxication is forbidden. Not because God is trying to be mean to us, and not because we are prevented from something that would otherwise cause us to have fun. No, it's because our brain, our reason, our senses, and our ability to use them in a sound way are one of the most noble things for us as people, as species, among all the other species that God created. Because through them, we are able to reach one of the most important, if not the most important conclusion in this life. And that is the fact that there is a creator, there is God, there is this Lord that we all must worship with respect and love, no matter what, because if we can reach this through our reason and through our senses, that means these senses are the most. It's just like having a tool that helps you dig for gold or any precious metal. Because of the work they do, because of the value of the gold, the tool you are actually using to find it becomes very important. Right? Like in the past months, what was one of the things that are most valuable in the world? Ventilators. Why? Because they saved lives. So they became very important. Not because like the material that goes into them, but because the kind of complicated work they do, saving lives, enabling people to breathe. Same thing with our brain, same thing with our reason, same thing with our senses. Why are it's very important to take care of them? Because they enable us to reach the conclusion that God exists. Third, and point number 3, and perhaps the last point for today, because I'm sure you are overwhelmed with the amount of information and things we have discussed today. Also, it's extremely important to not do and engage in activities that kind of neglect and maybe hurt or numb our senses, like watching TV 24-hour, doing video games all the time, and not engaging in things that sharpens our senses and our minds, like reading, like having conversations with people, like meditating, praying, all of that are things that we do in order for us to take care of our senses and our brains and our intellect that Allah has given us. If you read the Quran, guys, you will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time says, don't they reason? أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَنظُرُونَ. You know what these things mean? Don't they look? Don't they reason? Don't they use their senses? Don't they use their intellect? بَلْ أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. Allah called the people who don't do that, what? لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have minds, they don't use them. They have eyes, they don't look with them. They don't sense with them. They have ears, but they are deaf. They don't listen and try to reach that conclusion that God exists. Allah called these people أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. They are worse than animals. Why? Because even animals can realize through the senses that God given them that God exists. Alright guys, I think that's enough for today. We have covered enough. I'm going to be here for 10 more minutes. If you have any specific questions, if you have any general questions, I'm happy to answer them. Remember, the name of that scholar is St. Thomas Aquinas. He's a very famous. You don't really need to study him, or you can learn about him a little bit if you want. And that comes from his most important work called the Summa Theologia, or the Summation of Theology. And he was answering the question about the existence of God, specifically the question whether God exists, and specifically the objection that says that God doesn't exist because of the evil exists in the world. And we look just throughout the first way. There are four more. So we're going to go through four more, and then we kind of, as I said last time, we're going to be going between different works and different books, trying to, have a general understanding. I hope that wasn't too much for you. I always have too much trust and faith in young people being mature and being able to digest the things I'm saying, because hey, you do STEM and programming and get yourself into bigger things in school and sports, and when it comes to religion, you should just have the same kind of standard and expect to be excellent in the way you understand your faith and study it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khair. I'm here for 10-15 more minutes online. Send me a message, send me a question, and I'll be happy to do my best to answer them, inshallah. Thank you guys.